I never thought my marriage would come undone over a rental agreement. But then again, I never thought I'd have to learn who my wife really was by watching how she looked at another man. Back in June, things were supposed to be simple. Allison and I had been married 4 years, together for 7. She was my best friend, or at least I thought she was. We met at a conference in Nashville, a convention for mid-level insurance professionals that only people with sleep disorders could love. I worked in underwriting, she worked in claims. We were 2 insurance nerds bonding over stale coffee and an open bar. She said I was charming in a quiet way, whatever that meant. I told her she was the most interesting person in a room full of actuarial tables. We hit it off, and for a while, it felt like we just worked. We were both 30 now. No kids, but not for lack of trying. 1 miscarriage 2 years ago, then nothing. Just Ozer, a rescue cat we adopted during lockdown. Mean as hell to everyone but her. He hissed when I walked by but purred like a motorboat when she held him. Typical. We lived in a 2-bedroom in the city, in a place we'd outgrown. The rent had climbed again, and we figured it was time to downsize a little, save up for a house like responsible adults. That was our plan. Pay down the credit cards, skip a few dinners out, maybe end up somewhere with a backyard big enough for a grill and a fire pit. We spent 2 weekends looking at places. Most were garbage, either falling apart or so sterile it felt like a hotel room. Then we found this old brick building tucked between a row of cafes and a community garden. It had charm. Creaky wood floors, stained glass windows in the stairwell, and a view of the skyline from the 3rd floor that made Allison whisper, "Wow," under her breath. The unit had a little breakfast nook and a clawfoot tub. It felt like a place you'd fall in love in. The super showing us around was named Rochelle. Late 40s, cigarette voice, bleach blonde hair tied back with a scrunchie. She had kind eyes and called me Han, without thinking about it. Told us the landlord was a hands-on guy who liked to personally review every applicant. "You'll probably hear from him fast," she said. "He's picky but fair." I emailed in the application that night. 2 days later, I got a call. "Hey, this is Steve," the voice said. "Landlord for the unit on Sycamore Street." I remember thinking he had a voice that made you trust him. Smooth, even, the kind of guy you'd picture with salt and pepper hair and expensive shoes. He asked a few questions, confirmed income, employment, credit. Told me I had solid references, said we seemed like good tenants. We ended the call with him saying, "Let's meet Monday. I'll bring the lease." That weekend, Allison and I had a small fight. Not even a real one. Just one of those tension things that builds up over time. She wanted to go out with some old coworkers, drinks at a rooftop bar. I didn't. I'd had a long week, and honestly, I was tired. She looked disappointed when I said I'd stay in, but she didn't argue. Just said, "Okay, well, I'll be home late then," and left in a red dress I hadn't seen her wear in a year. I sat on the couch, opened a beer, and turned on a Ken Burns documentary. I don't even remember which one. Something about the Civil War. I passed out before the end of the 2nd episode. She came back after midnight. I was pretending to be asleep when she walked in. I heard her heels clack softly on the hardwood, then pause in the kitchen. The fridge opened. Closed. Then silence. I half expected her to come sit with me, touch my arm, say goodnight. She didn't. Monday came. Lease day. I got to the building around 10 a.m. The sidewalk smelled like baking concrete. There was a man standing outside with a folder and a fountain pen in his hand. Tall, tan, probably in his early 50s, wearing aviators and a button-down that looked too expensive for a landlord who charged below market rent. "Daniel?" he said with a smile. "I'm Steve. This is my wife, Marcy." Marcy stood next to him, poised like a catalog model, beige dress, hair in a tight bun, polite but distracted eyes. She handed me the lease with a soft, "Nice to meet you." I shook Steve's hand. His grip was strong. Confident. Familiar in a way that unsettled me. "Let's get this signed," he said, flipping through the paperwork. "You're gonna love it here." I looked at him for a moment longer than I meant to. There was something about him. The eyes. I couldn't place it. A feeling of déjà vu prickled the back of my neck. But I shrugged it off, signed the lease, and shook his hand again. "Welcome home," he said. I didn't know it then, but I just signed a lease with the man who was already sleeping with my wife. More than once. And somehow, she still managed to smile at me that night like nothing had happened. They say most betrayals don't happen all at once, they unravel like threads. You don't see the full picture until it's in tatters at your feet. The first few weeks in the new apartment felt like a reset button. We painted the walls a warm eggshell color that Allison said reminded her of French cafes. I didn't see it, but I went along with it. We unpacked our lives together, box by box, room by room. There was something strangely romantic about starting over in a place with chipped baseboards and an old radiator that rattled like it had something to say. Allison seemed lighter. Happier. She played music more often, old soul records and indie folk. She lit candles in the evenings, even when it wasn't cold out. She'd hum when she cooked, something I hadn't heard her do in months. "You know," she said one morning, pouring herself a coffee, "I think this move was good for us." I nodded, chewing my toast. "Yeah. Feels like we're moving forward again." And it did. For a while, at least. Then Steve started showing up. Not constantly. Just enough to notice. Once, to check on the boiler. Another time, he said he wanted to inspect the back stairwell, something about city code. He was always polite, always smiled like he was just doing his job. I didn't think much of it at first. He was a landlord, after all. Landlords show up. That's what they do. But looking back, I realized something else now. He never came when I was working from home. Only when I wasn't supposed to be there. The first real crack appeared 2 weeks after we moved in. I came home early on a Thursday. I had a splitting headache and left work around 1 p.m. I didn't text Allison because I figured she'd be running errands or maybe still at her own office. When I walked in, the apartment was quiet, too quiet. The kind that makes you pause just inside the door. The TV was on, paused on some Netflix show we'd been binging. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table, next to a single glass. The kind with lipstick smudged on the rim. A faint scent hung in the air. Cologne. Not mine. Not the cheap stuff either. Something woodsy and deep. Something expensive. "Allison?" I called. No answer. Then I heard the shower running. I waited. The water turned off. A few minutes later, she stepped out of the bathroom in a towel, her wet hair wrapped like a turban. She blinked when she saw me. Just for a moment. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. "I didn't know you were home," she said. "I had a headache. Left early." "You all right?" "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just took a nap. Was about to shower." She didn't mention the wine. I glanced at the glass. Then back at her. "I didn't know you were drinking this early," I said lightly, trying to sound casual. She waved it off. "Just a little. I was reading. You know how I get." She smiled. That soft, practiced kind. The one she used on waiters and coworkers. I kissed her forehead and told myself it was fine. But something small started whispering in the back of my mind. The second time Steve came by, it was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been working from home that day because of a software update. He knocked on the door with his usual smile. "Daniel," he said, clearly surprised. "Didn't expect you home?" He held up a screwdriver and a little notepad. "Just checking the air vents. Tenant in 3C said they were clogged. Figured I'd look at yours while I'm here." I nodded and let him in. He walked through like he'd done it before. I watched his eyes as he moved, how they flicked toward the hallway, how he seemed to scan the apartment like he was taking mental inventory. When Allison came out of the bedroom, something flickered in her face. Not shock. Not fear. Just tightness. "Oh," she said too casually. "Didn't know you were coming by, Steve." He smiled. "Routine check." She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. Later that night, I asked her if she knew he was coming. No, she said too quickly. Must have forgot if he did. Another lie, maybe? Or maybe just a lapse. Either way, I started paying more attention. That's when I noticed the pattern. Whenever I was out, at work, running errands at the gym, there were little signs of someone else. A second coffee mug in the sink when I knew I'd only had one. The throw blanket folded differently on the couch. The scent of aftershave that didn't belong to me. And once, a text I glimpsed over her shoulder. From someone named S. It said, "Same time next week, smiley face." She closed her phone quickly and smiled like nothing happened. I didn't ask. I told myself it could be anyone. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't just anyone. There's a certain kind of dread that seeps in slow, like water under the floorboards. It doesn't announce itself. It just starts to rot everything quietly. I wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. Because once you say it out loud, once you admit something is wrong, you can't ever go back to pretending it's right. And I wasn't ready to lose my marriage. Not yet. But I was starting to see the cracks. And I couldn't unsee them. For a while, I thought maybe it was all in my head, the glances, the half-truths, the way the wine bottle always seemed a little emptier than I remembered. You start to question yourself in moments like that, trying to find the boundary between gut instinct and paranoia. But it's a blurry line when you're in love with someone you used to trust without thinking. I started keeping a mental log of everything, not because I was trying to catch her in a lie, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed to find a pattern, some kind of logic to what I was feeling. I'd come home and scan the apartment like a detective at a crime scene, noting things that felt slightly off, a damp towel that wasn't in the hamper, a faint imprint in the couch that didn't match the shape of Allison's body, or the faintest trace of a scent I couldn't place but knew didn't belong to me. Allison didn't notice the shift in me, or if she did, she was pretending not to. She moved through the apartment like she always had, casually humming while she did dishes, curling up on the couch with a book she would never finish, texting someone and smiling to herself before tossing the phone face down on the coffee table. I told myself it could be anyone on the other end of that screen, some friend from work or her sister back in Charlotte, but it didn't sit right, not the way she angled the phone away from me, not the way her expression would shift into something half-sweet, half-secret before she quickly erased it. Then one night something happened that made the ground under me shift, not collapse, not completely, but just enough that I knew I was standing on something hollow. It was a Wednesday. I had worked late, stayed in the office to finish reviewing a stack of auto claims that were piling up on my desk. By the time I got home, it was a little after 9. The lights in the living room were off, and the apartment was quiet, not the cozy kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your chest a little too firmly. I kicked off my shoes and headed into the kitchen, where I found a plate of pasta sitting on the counter, half covered in plastic wrap. The steam was gone, but it was still warm, which meant she had made it recently. That alone wouldn't have struck me as odd. Allison often made dinner even if she wasn't hungry herself. She said cooking helped her unwind, helped her feel useful. But she wasn't in the living room, wasn't watching TV, wasn't in bed. When I finally found her, she was sitting on the fire escape, wrapped in her robe, smoking a cigarette. I stood there for a second in the dark, watching the glow of the ember at the tip of her cigarette flicker like a signal light. She hadn't smoked since college, at least, not that I'd known. "You're smoking now?" I asked, trying not to sound as thrown off as I felt. She didn't turn around right away, just exhaled slowly before responding. "Sometimes. Just 1 or 2, when I can't sleep." "You couldn't sleep at 9:30? I asked, stepping closer. She shrugged and said, "I was restless." I stood next to her for a few minutes, leaning on the railing, looking out at the city lights in silence. She didn't offer me a cigarette, didn't explain anything further. We just stood there, side by side, both pretending that nothing about this moment was strange. Eventually, I asked the question that had been clawing at the back of my throat for weeks. "Do you talk to Steve when I'm not home?" She turned her head toward me, squinting slightly. Why would I? The way she said it, calm, measured, almost amused, made me feel foolish for even asking, and yet there was something rehearsed in her voice, like she had anticipated the question and had already chosen the tone she would use when answering. I don't know, I said. He just seems to be around a lot. More than most landlords. She took a drag of her cigarette, exhaled slowly, and said, He's just being thorough. The place is old. Lots of little things to fix. I didn't respond. I just looked at the smoke curling into the night sky, trying to imagine myself believing her. But something in her body language had changed. Her shoulders were too still, her voice too smooth. It felt like she was performing for me, and not very well. That night I barely slept. I lay beside her in bed, staring at the ceiling while she breathed steadily next to me, her back turned in that subtle way that makes you feel miles apart even when you're touching. I wondered if she was awake too, pretending like I was. In the morning, she made coffee like nothing had happened, dressed in a navy blouse I hadn't seen in months, and left for work with a kiss that landed somewhere near my cheek. I waited until she was gone before I got up. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my boxers, the room filled with the faint smell of her perfume and that same trace of foreign cologne that I'd been trying to pretend wasn't there. That was the morning I checked the apartment's smart lock history. The door kept a log of every time it was unlocked or locked, useful when you're tracking package deliveries or maintenance visits. I pulled up the app on my phone and scrolled through the past few weeks. And there it was. A log entry from last Tuesday, unlocked at 12:14 p.m., locked again at 1:38 p.m. I had been at work. So had Allison, supposedly. But someone had been inside. Someone who had access. There weren't many people who did. And suddenly, the wine glass on the table and the subtle scent in the air started to feel less like coincidences and more like evidence. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because some part of me, the same stubborn, hopeful part that had believed in marriage vows and second chances, still wasn't ready to see what I already knew. But the floorboards beneath me were colder now. And I had started listening for footsteps that didn't belong. There's something about a secret that changes a person, not just the one keeping it, but the one who suspects it. It gets into your bloodstream, into your bones. It poisons everything soft inside you and replaces it with suspicion, with second-guessing, with a quiet kind of rage that doesn't scream or punch walls. It just waits. I became someone I didn't recognize during that month. Someone who noticed the smallest things, the shift in a perfume's undertone, the way her phone screen flashed blue at 11:47 p.m., and then dimmed again. I wasn't proud of it. But I didn't stop. Allison, for her part, was either oblivious or playing a masterful game of pretend. She kissed me goodbye every morning with lips that felt slightly more distant each day. She asked how my day was while stirring pasta, but her eyes rarely met mine. She laughed at the TV, but never with me. It was like I was living with a very convincing replica of my wife. The worst part was how easily I adapted to it. How I fell in line with the silence between us like it had always been there. We weren't fighting, but we weren't loving either. We were existing, two figures in a snow globe someone forgot to shake. One Friday, about 3 weeks after I'd first started suspecting something, I told my boss I needed to work from home again. No reason given. Just wanted a quieter space, I said. The truth was, I needed to know what was happening while I wasn't there. I needed to see it with my own eyes. By noon, Allison texted that she had a training lunch with a new hire and wouldn't be back until later in the afternoon. Her message came with a smiley face, a little too cheerful, like she was trying to disguise something under a layer of emoji makeup. I waited. Didn't move. Didn't even breathe too loudly. At 12:39 p.m., I heard the front door unlock. I was in the bedroom, door cracked just enough to see the hallway. I didn't make a sound. My heart felt like it was trying to dig its way out of my chest, but I stayed still. It was Steve. He walked in like he belonged there, holding a to-go bag in one hand and his phone in the other. He wasn't in work clothes. No clipboard, no tools. He wore jeans and a fitted black t-shirt, sunglasses tucked into the collar. "Allie?" he called out softly, like this was something they did often. A moment later, she stepped into view. She was barefoot, wearing leggings and an oversized shirt that I recognized as one of mine. Her hair was still damp, like she just showered. She kissed him on the cheek, and I watched him set the bag down on the kitchen counter like it was just another lunch date. They didn't kiss on the mouth. Not yet. They didn't touch for more than a second. But it was the familiarity that gutted me. The casual intimacy of it. The way she poured him a glass of water without asking, how he grabbed 2 plates from the cabinet without looking. This wasn't new. This had been happening. And I had been blind. I stayed frozen for nearly 20 minutes, watching them eat, listening to the hum of their voices drift through the hallway. They laughed at something. She playfully swatted his arm. He reached out and brushed something off her cheek. My hands clenched so tight I didn't realize my nails had dug half-moons into my palms. Eventually, they moved to the couch. She curled her legs under her. He leaned back, comfortable. They didn't even touch, but they didn't need to. The closeness was already written all over their body language. That's what made it real, not some scandalous moment, not some damning kiss. Just the comfort. The quiet, dangerous comfort. At 1:52 p.m., Steve stood up and stretched. Said something I couldn't hear. She nodded. He leaned in and kissed her on the forehead, not passionate, but not platonic either. The kind of kiss you give someone who already belongs to you. And then he left. I waited until the door clicked shut before I moved. My legs were shaking when I stood. My whole body felt like it had been dunked in ice water. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Maybe because some part of me had already known. I walked out into the kitchen. She was putting plates in the sink. She jumped when she saw me. "Jesus!" she gasped. "You scared the hell out of me." I looked at her. Really looked at her. What was Steve doing here? Her face changed. Just slightly. But enough. He was dropping off lunch. For both of us, she said too quickly. I mentioned I was working from home today and you said you were out at a training lunch. I interrupted. She paused. I was going to be, but it got cancelled, and he offered to bring something by. It was nothing, Dan. Wasn't nothing, I said quietly. Her eyes darted to the hallway, to the bedroom. You've been home this whole time? Yeah. She swallowed. There was a beat of silence between us that felt like it lasted a century. Her shoulders were tight, her hands still clutching a dish towel like it could anchor her in this moment. We're not sleeping together, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. If that's what you think. I didn't say anything. Because I didn't believe her. And because something deeper in me, something old and bruised and tired, didn't want to hear her lie again. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, down the hall, and into the bedroom. I closed the door behind me. And I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, wondering when exactly the person I loved became someone I didn't recognize anymore. After that Friday, nothing returned to normal. Not that anything had really been normal for a long time, but at least before, I could pretend. Before I saw them together in our kitchen, before I saw him walk out of our front door like it belonged to him, there was space for delusion, for the belief that I might be wrong. But once you've seen the storm creeping over the horizon, you can't talk yourself into sunshine. She didn't bring it up again that weekend. Not once. Not on Saturday morning when she made waffles, not on Sunday when we did the laundry together in silence, not even that night when she climbed into bed beside me and said, "Good night," like the word wasn't hollow. It was as if we were both in on the same quiet agreement, that we would delay the war a few days longer, maybe forever if we could just stay still and not move too quickly. But everything felt wrong. The apartment, which once held the warmth of a shared life, now felt like a hotel room you stay in after your luggage has been stolen. You're there, technically, but everything familiar is gone. We moved around each other like ghosts. I'd brush her hand accidentally in the kitchen, and she'd flinch just enough for me to feel it. She'd look at me across the dinner table and blink like she couldn't quite remember who I used to be. I started sleeping with my back to her. Not intentionally at first. I told myself it was just more comfortable. But over time, it became a wall, soft and silent but impenetrable. And still, I didn't confront her. Not fully. I asked questions in careful half measures, hoping she'd trip over one of her answers and fall into confession. But she never did. And I was growing tired of pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I became obsessive, I guess. I started keeping a private log of Steve's visits. I went through our old text threads and emails, comparing timestamps, trying to find overlaps in their stories. I checked the smart lock history daily. One afternoon, I even found myself driving past the office where Allison worked, just to see if her car was actually in the lot. It was, but that didn't settle anything. The doubt had already spread like mold behind drywall, invisible from the outside, but corrosive underneath. Then, a strange thing happened that shifted the whole center of gravity. It was the following Thursday when I ran into Rochelle, the super who'd first shown us the place. I hadn't seen her much since we moved in, but I caught her on the sidewalk while I was getting the mail. "Hey, stranger," she said with a smile, flicking ash from her cigarette. I nodded, trying to match her tone. "Hey. How's everything?" She shrugged. "Same as always. You settling in okay?" "Yeah," I said, and then hesitated. "Actually, weird question. Steve's been around a lot lately. Is that normal?" She raised an eyebrow and tilted her head. "Huh. Has he?" "Yeah. He stopped by a few times. Said he was doing maintenance checks." Rochelle took another drag of her cigarette, her lips twitching slightly like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or spit. "Well, that's news to me. Steve doesn't do maintenance. He pays me for that. Only time he steps foot on the property is when he's showing a unit or collecting papers." My stomach turned. She must have seen something change in my face, because she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You okay, hon?" I nodded slowly, too slow to be convincing. "Yeah. Just didn't know that." She looked at me for a long moment. Sometimes people surprise you. You think you know them then. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That night, I watched Allison carefully. We ate Chinese takeout on the couch. She made a joke about a show we used to love, and I laughed, but it was hollow. Every movement she made felt rehearsed. Every smile seemed just a beat too late, like she was acting in a play I hadn't been invited to audition for. I thought about confronting her right then. Thought about telling her what Rochelle said, about asking her why Steve had been in our home when he wasn't supposed to be. But something in me stopped. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe, and this is the one I hate the most, maybe I didn't want the answer, because I already knew it, and hearing her say it out loud would kill the last piece of me that still believed in us. So I waited. And the next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I followed her. She said she had an early meeting at a cafe on the west side. Some new regional policy update she needed to go over with her team. She left at 7:30, wearing a white blouse and her navy blazer, hair pulled back, no makeup. She always said it made her feel more competent that way. I waited 10 minutes after she pulled out, then got in my car and followed. It was easy. Too easy. She didn't go west. She went north, to a quiet neighborhood near the university. I kept my distance, stayed 2 cars behind. She parked near a row of duplexes, got out, checked her phone. And then Steve came out of one of the doors. Not a public cafe. Not an office. His house. I pulled into a side street, and watched from a distance as they spoke for a minute on the porch. He leaned in. She didn't pull away. I saw his hand brush her waist, the way you do when you're not afraid of being seen. Then she went inside. He followed. The door closed. And I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, feeling the last few years of my life collapse inward like a house without a foundation. I didn't follow her in. Not that day. But something inside me shifted in a way I couldn't undo. Whatever illusion I'd been clinging to, the fragile hope that this was just emotional, just harmless, just a mistake that hadn't yet become betrayal, it shattered. And in its place was a colder truth. One that I wasn't sure I was strong enough to face. There's a strange stillness that settles over you when the truth finally becomes too large to ignore. I sat in my car that morning, parked half a block from Steve's duplex, watching the front door they had just disappeared behind. There wasn't a part of me that could argue against what I had seen. No mental gymnastics. No hopeful, maybe they're just talking. Rationalizations. It was done. Over. Truth, plain and brutal. And yet I didn't move. I didn't charge up to the door or call her phone. I didn't bang on the windows or shout her name in the street. I sat there like someone watching the house he used to live in, a tourist of his own life, helpless and small. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. The sky was still overcast, the air heavy like it might rain. I stared at the sidewalk, the cracks between the stones, the way weeds pushed up through them. It was stupid, but I thought of our apartment's balcony, how Allison had once bought little ceramic planters and tried to grow mint, basil, and lavender in them. Nothing lived. She always forgot to water them. I'm a killer of all things green. She had laughed once. I hadn't realized until then how easily she laughed off responsibility. I finally pulled away from the curb, not because I was ready to leave, but because I couldn't sit in that car anymore without feeling like I might come apart at the seams. I drove aimlessly for an hour. Through side streets I didn't recognize. Past parks and storefronts and stop signs that felt unfamiliar even though I'd probably passed them a dozen times before. Eventually, I pulled into a quiet lot behind a public library, turned off the engine, and just sat. That's when I called Marcus. Marcus and I had been friends since college. He was the kind of guy who never quite grew out of hoodies and video games, but he was loyal and smart, and had the uncanny ability to sense when I wasn't okay, even when I lied about it. I hadn't told him much about what I'd been feeling over the past month. Just the usual relationship stuff. Lying. I hadn't wanted to say anything until I had proof. Now I had more than proof. I had a full-blown crime scene in my memory. When he picked up, his voice was groggy. Yo. You good? I didn't answer right away. Dan? I followed her this morning, I said, voice low and tight. A pause. Jesus. She went to his place. A longer pause. They kissed, I continued. Or something close to it. I didn't see everything. But I saw enough. She went inside. Marcus let out a slow breath. You want me to come meet you? I don't know, I said. I don't know what I'm doing. Where are you? Library lot. On Franklin. Stay there. I'll bring coffee. He hung up without waiting for me to answer. While I waited, I pulled out my phone and opened the photo app. I hadn't taken pictures of them. Part of me still didn't want physical proof. But I did something else instead. I scrolled back through old pictures of Allison and me. Birthdays. A wedding we'd attended 2 summers ago. Our trip to Asheville where we got caught in the rain and danced barefoot in the street like we were in some indie movie montage. In those photos, she was smiling. Holding my hand. Resting her head on my shoulder. Now I couldn't tell if that version of her had ever really existed. When Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, he handed me a black coffee without saying anything and sat on the curb beside my car. We didn't speak for a long while. We just sat there, sipping in silence like 2 men at a wake. Eventually I said, You ever feel like your life changed, but nobody told you until it was too late to do anything about it? All the time, he said. Usually in therapy. I almost laughed. Almost. I keep thinking about the way she looked at him. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even secretive. It was just normal. Like they do this all the time. They probably do. I nodded. She said they weren't sleeping together. Then she's either lying or redefining what that means. Yeah. Then Marcus said something that hadn't occurred to me, something that would open a new door entirely. You ever wonder if he's married? I turned my head. What? Steve, he said. You ever think about whether he has a wife? The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. I don't know why. Maybe because he seemed so self-assured, so smooth, like he belonged in control of every room he entered. He didn't feel like someone who answered to anyone. You should check, Marcus said. Guy like that. I'd put money on it. The next day I did. I don't work in cybersecurity or anything like that, but in the insurance world you pick up some tricks. Public records. Real estate registries. Phone lookups. The kind of tools that help you verify identities, chase down fraud, confirm asset ownership. It didn't take long. Steve wasn't just a landlord. He was a real estate consultant for a mid-sized firm downtown. And he wasn't single. He had a wife. Her name was Angela McConnell, and she worked at a nonprofit that helped families in transition. They had one child, a son in high school. Lived in a 2-story house in the next county over. I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart pounding. Not just from the betrayal I already knew, but from the new layer of complexity now revealing itself. Steve was married. And Allison knew how much I hated cheating. She'd seen it wreck my sister's marriage, watched the fallout firsthand. We had made jokes together once about men like this, smug guys who lived double lives and didn't blink while doing it. And now she was with one. Not just sleeping with him. Hiding for him. Lying for him. She was the other woman. And she didn't even know it. Or worse, maybe she did. I wish I could say that after I learned about Steve's wife, Angela, I felt clarity, maybe even a sense of justice. That I had some righteous anger to carry me forward, some moral high ground to stand on while I exposed everything. But what I actually felt was something much harder to define. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't rage. It was something colder. Heavier. Like grief with a sharp edge. I sat in my office that night long after Allison went to sleep, staring at the tab on my computer that displayed Steve's family, a school fundraiser photo of Angela and their teenage son standing beside a booth with paper lanterns, the kind you only see at community fairs. She had kind eyes. A little tired. Her smile wasn't fake, but it wasn't effortless either. She looked like someone who held it all together just well enough to keep people from asking questions. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even lie next to Allison without feeling like I might suffocate. So I slept on the couch again, blaming the back pain and too much work. Excuse that had become my default response. She barely questioned it anymore. In fact, she seemed relieved. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I drove to the address I'd found for Steve and Angela. Their neighborhood was lined with dogwood trees and SUVs with "Honor Roll Student" stickers. The kind of place where you wave to your neighbors while watering your lawn. Perfect. Peaceful. Fragile. I didn't knock. I didn't even get out of the car. I just sat there for a while, watching the house. There was a porch swing, wind chimes, a ceramic frog by the front steps. And as I sat, something began to take shape in my chest, not a plan, not yet, but a realization. Angela had no idea. And if she did, she was hiding it well. I left without doing anything. My conscience wasn't clear, but it wasn't ready to carry that weight. Not yet. But it gave me an idea. That night, I sat Allison down at the kitchen table. No distractions. No wine. No music humming from the speaker she always left on low. Just the two of us, across from each other, the air so thick you could have sliced it with a butter knife. "I know about you and Steve," I said. Her face didn't move. Not at first. But I watched the color drain from her cheeks, like blood pulling back in retreat. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her hands. I expected denial. An outburst. Maybe even tears. What I got was silence. "Are you going to say anything?" I asked, though my voice didn't carry much weight anymore. I wasn't yelling. I didn't have the energy for that. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said finally. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the line was so predictable it almost hurt more than the truth itself. I didn't mean for it to happen. Like that made it a fender bender. I leaned back in the chair. How long? She hesitated. Then, 2 months. I stared at her. It's been 3. She flinched. Okay. 3. Did it start before we moved in? No. I swear no. I didn't even know him before the lease. That much, at least, I believed. And what? I asked. He came by to fix a faucet and just swept you off your feet. Her mouth trembled. It wasn't like that. I was lonely. You were somewhere else all the time. There it was. The pivot. I stood up, paced once across the room, then turned to face her. So that's what this is. My fault. No, she said quickly. Not your fault. But things weren't okay. You know that. I did. But I also knew that loneliness doesn't justify betrayal. That someone hurting doesn't give them permission to hurt back. We could have talked. We could have screamed. We could have done anything other than this. And then I said the one thing that changed everything. He's married, Allison. She froze. What? Steve. He has a wife. Angela. They have a kid. A teenage son. She shook her head, eyes wide. No. No, he told me he was divorced. He said he'd been single for over a year. Well, I said, letting the weight of it settle between us. He lied. I watched her face crumble in stages: confusion, disbelief, shame, and finally, something close to horror. Her hands trembled against the edge of the table. You're lying, she whispered. I pulled up the website on my phone, the fundraiser photo, the public records. I slid it across the table to her. She stared at the screen like it was a bomb counting down. Then she started crying. Not soft, cinematic crying. Not pretty tears. These were ugly sobs, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than regret. And even then, I didn't know if she was crying because of what she'd done to me or what Steve had done to her. I let her cry. I didn't touch her. Didn't comfort her. I just sat there and watched the woman I married fall apart in front of me, and I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. After a while, she asked through broken breaths, "What do we do now?" And for the first time since all of this began, I told her the truth. I don't know. I didn't know if I wanted to fix things. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. I didn't know if I'd ever believe another word out of her mouth, or if I wanted to try. But more than anything, I didn't know if I could stay married to someone who had the capacity to be someone else, someone I never met until it was too late. The days after Allison's confession unfolded like slow-motion wreckage. You expect something explosive after a confrontation, shouting, tears, plates against the wall. But real betrayal doesn't always land like thunder. Sometimes it just lingers in the quiet, and the spaces between what used to be routine. Like how we started eating meals in silence. How she stayed up late on the couch, and I stopped asking her when she was coming to bed. How we brushed shoulders in the hallway and flinched like strangers passing on a crowded street. She apologized. A lot. The kind of apologies that came at random times, once while brushing her teeth, once in the middle of a grocery aisle, once when she handed me a coffee and broke into tears because I said, "Thanks," without looking at her. But I didn't know what to do with her guilt. It didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the image of her opening our door for another man. It didn't erase the way she had stared at him like he was a promise and I was a chore. And it sure as hell didn't make me forget that she wasn't just unfaithful, she'd been reckless. Thoughtless. She hadn't just lied to me. She'd let herself become someone else's lie, too. And Steve, he was a different kind of betrayal entirely. I couldn't stop thinking about Angela. About the picture of her standing at that school fundraiser next to their son. About the life she was probably still living in blissful ignorance, planning dinners, buying groceries, waiting for a man who spent his lunch hours in my home, in my wife. There was a moment, A sharp, awful moment, when I actually thought, she deserves to know. It started as a flicker. Then it grew. That weekend, I found myself looking at Angela's Facebook page again. It was public. She didn't post much, family photos, a few quotes about parenting, the occasional recipe share. She looked kind. Ordinary. Like someone who sent thank you cards for birthday gifts and always had tissues in her purse. The kind of woman who didn't know she was being erased behind closed doors. I wrote a message. Just a draft. Hi, you don't know me, but I think we need to talk. It's about your husband. I'm not trying to cause drama, but you deserve the truth. I didn't send it. Not yet. I stared at it for a long time, then closed my laptop and went for a walk. I hadn't done that in a while. Just walked. It was cold, early spring air clinging to the sidewalks, and I didn't take a coat. I passed a bakery we used to go to. They still had the chalkboard outside, 2-for-1 scones on Sundays. We used to split a raspberry one. Now I couldn't even look at it without tasting bitterness. By the time I got back, Allison was in the kitchen, chopping onions like they owed her money. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes still red from crying. You okay? She asked, which was absurd, but I nodded anyway. I watched her for a moment. The woman I loved. The woman I still knew. The woman I no longer recognized. Did you know he was married? I asked again. She shook her head. I swear I didn't. And if you had? She paused. The knife stopped midair. I don't know, she said finally. I'd like to think I would have stopped. But I don't know. I wasn't thinking about anyone else. She said it with shame, not pride. But it still hurt. Because for her, it had been a feeling. A pull. A moment that stretched into many. For me, it had been a collapse. That night, I opened the draft message again. I sat with it. Rewrote it. Deleted it. Rewrote it again. What stopped me wasn't mercy. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was fear. Not fear of Steve. Not fear of Allison. Fear of becoming someone else's reckoning. What if I told Angela and she already knew? What if I told her and shattered a life she'd spent decades trying to hold together? What if I told her, and nothing changed? That night, I didn't sleep again. Instead, I opened our closet and started separating my things. Sweaters I hadn't worn since winter. Old running shoes. The blue button-down she always said made me look handsome in a dad on a dating app sort of way. I packed slowly. Methodically. Not with anger. Just necessity. The next morning, I told her I was leaving. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just nodded and asked if I needed help carrying the boxes to the car. No, I said. I've got it. And I did. I got in my car, drove to Marcus's place, and spent the next few nights on his pull-out couch, drinking cheap beer and watching reruns of shows we both used to quote in college. We didn't talk much. But sometimes silence is enough. A few days later, I saw Steve in the parking lot of the building. I had returned for the last of my things, Dozer's carrier, a few kitchen items, an old guitar I hadn't touched since our second anniversary. He spotted me near the trunk of my car, walked over like nothing was wrong. Hey, he said, casual as hell. Heard you were moving out. I nodded. Yeah. He looked down at the sidewalk. Shame. I liked having you guys as tenants. It took everything in me not to swing. Instead, I said the one thing I knew would matter. She knows. His face changed. Just slightly. A micro-expression. A crack. She knows what? That you're married. I didn't wait for a response. Didn't need one. I got in the car. Drove away. I never did message Angela. Maybe that makes me a coward. Or maybe it makes me someone who finally understands that knowing the truth doesn't always mean you're the one who has to speak it. Sometimes you just walk away. And let the silence do the talking. It's been 13 months since I left that apartment. Since I loaded the last of my things into the trunk of my car and drove away without saying goodbye to the woman I had once promised forever to. People always talk about endings like they're a single moment, a slammed door, a shouted confession, a final straw, but the truth is, most endings are slow. They bleed out. They echo. They never really end, not completely. I live in a smaller place now. It's not much, a one-bedroom walk up above a bakery that opens at 6 a.m. and makes the whole block smell like warm sugar and rising dough. The floors creak, the heat rattles in winter, and the kitchen sink leaks just enough to stain the cabinet beneath it. But it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that word actually means something. I kept Dozer, not because I'm particularly good with pets. In fact, I think he resents me for the upheaval. But because he didn't ask to be part of any of this, and because on the nights when the silence gets too loud, the sound of him thudding off the windowsill like an aging curmudgeon keeps me tethered to something real. There's comfort in routine, even the stubborn, feline kind. Allison and I finalized the divorce 6 months ago. It was quiet, almost transactional. No court battles, no drawn-out disputes over furniture or money. Just paperwork and a final meeting where either of us made eye contact for longer than a few seconds at a time. She looked older that day, not in years, but in weight. There was a kind of tiredness behind her eyes that I hadn't seen before. I don't know if it was guilt, or grief, or just the exhaustion that comes from knowing you burned something down and will never quite understand why you lit the match. She never tried to stop the divorce. Never begged. Never made promises about counseling or healing or starting over. I think she knew, maybe even before I did, that whatever we had built together was too cracked to hold water anymore. Love can be resilient, but trust? Trust is a different animal entirely. Once you break it, you can spend a lifetime apologizing and still never put the pieces back in the right order. I found out a few weeks after I moved out that she had cut off contact with Steve entirely. Or at least, that's what she told me in one of the handful of messages she sent me during those early weeks. Texts that arrived too late at night, filled with regret and fragments of memories she thought might still matter to me. I never responded. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I had nothing left to give. She said she confronted him. That he denied everything at first, then deflected, then finally admitted the truth with the casual cruelty of a man who had done this before. She said he apologized, but it was the kind of apology that sounded like a script. One he'd used on someone else before. Maybe several someone else's. I don't know if Angela ever found out. I still think about her sometimes, usually when I'm grocery shopping and I see a woman her age comparing prices on peanut butter, or when I pass a soccer field and catch a glimpse of a teenage boy with his head down, earbuds in, living in a world I'll never understand. Sometimes I think about messaging her. But I never do. I've dated a little. Nothing serious. A few coffee shop first meetings, a few awkward dinners where the conversation never quite catches fire. I met a woman named Rachel who made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months, not the polite, social kind of laugh, but the involuntary kind that slips out of you before you can stop it. We went on 4 dates. I told her the truth about my past, at least the outline of it, and she didn't flinch. But I couldn't give her what she needed, not yet. Maybe not ever. So I ended it before I could start lying to her by pretending I was ready. Therapy helped. Still helps, when I make myself go. I didn't think I needed it, not at first. I thought I could reason my way out of the pain, organize it like a spreadsheet and file it under things I've survived. But pain doesn't work that way. It lingers in the small moments, in the sound of a key turning in a lock, in the way someone checks their phone and smiles just a second too long. It lives in the questions you ask yourself late at night. Was I enough? Did I miss the signs? Could I have saved it? My therapist once asked me what I wanted most out of all of this. What I hoped to feel on the other side. I told her I didn't want to feel stupid anymore. That's what betrayal does to you. It doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your version of reality. It makes you doubt the way you see the world, the way you read people, the way you remember entire years of your life. You question every laugh, every kiss, every night spent lying next to someone who was already somewhere else. But eventually, the fog lifts. Eventually, you realize that being lied to doesn't make you naive. It makes you human. And surviving it? That makes you stronger. I still don't believe everything happens for a reason. I think sometimes people just make selfish choices, and those choices ripple outward until they wreck things that were once beautiful. But I also think there's value in the wreckage, in learning who you are when the dust settles, when the silence becomes your companion, not your enemy. These days I wake up without dread. I make coffee. I read. I work. I listen to the creak of the floorboards and the morning clatter of the bakery downstairs. I go on walks without needing a destination. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch myself smiling. Not because I'm over it, but because I'm still here. And that, somehow, feels like enough.